What's going on, guys? So I wanted to make a video this evening about just a kind of a testimony, I guess, about my past experiences with substances, music festivals, clubbing, you know, partaking in like nefarious things, like all the stuff that basically, like if you think of the 60s, like the love revolution, all the stuff that was pushed heavily upon the youth, and since then it has kind of taken over I wouldn't say my generation, I would say it's taken over the world completely. Um, things like rampant sex and drug abuse and alcoholism, rock and roll, and like all these, like we are already so misled in this day and age. We are all told that, I guess we kind of it's pushed onto us as an agenda. And it all kind of started, like, first of all, with a person like Aleister Crowley, who's a mystic from back in like the earlier 20th century. And he was basically the first person who brought forward this idea of like rampant revolution, open sexuality. His whole thing was the law of Thelema, which was do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. And how that has basically become how most of us live our lives, and we aren't even aware of it, because it's just so like, whatever, everyone's doing it, let's just follow the flock like a bunch of sheep. And yeah, from that it developed into the 60s love revolution. And I mean, even the Beatles spoke about it openly, no, not the Beatles, sorry, who was that guy? Anyways, it was a guy back in the 60s, I can't remember his name right now, who said, turn on, tune in, drop out. And he was basically talking about, he was instigating a revolution. And he even said, I can't remember his name right now. He even said he feels like he's carrying on the work of Aleister Crowley, God damn it, I can't remember his name. But yeah, so this is a guy who was like a college professor, completely switched around, started professing to the youth about like rampant revolution, free, open sexuality, do what thou wilt. He even said he felt he was carrying on the work of Aleister Crowley. And now what we have in this day and age is a complete lack of spiritual awareness when it comes to the things that we are attaching our spirit to when it comes to drugs, alcohol, sex. Like I used to be very into that whole lifestyle. Not to say that I was like a fucking sleeping around with hundreds of women or whatever, and like injecting heroin into my arms or whatever. That's not the case, but I was definitely leaning more towards that lifestyle. And I can't really say what it was. It was just more, I found it very appealing because I've always wondered, I wonder what acid feels like. I wonder what mushrooms feel like. I wonder what, and I could debate upon which drugs are good and which drugs are bad, but I'm not going to get into that. Like, I don't think, now, the way that I see it now, I don't think any drugs for any matter are good for you in any way, shape or form. And before, I would tell you, yeah, no, like mushrooms are fine, dude. Like you can take mushrooms and you can still have a good time, yada yada. The point is that it's not godly, to be abusing substances like that. It just goes against a lot of spiritual, it goes against the word of God. He doesn't want us to be out here partaking in these things. And I know when I talk about God and I talk about religious stuff, it puts a lot of people off, but that's fine. If the message is not for you, then you're welcome to click off and go watch something else. But I would like, for you to stay and actually listen to what I have to say, because I feel like you can definitely get some value from it. I started with substances from the age of 14, 15, I would say 15. I started, with cigarettes and alcohol like most people do. And I mean, my story is not necessarily that like different from most people's stories. Most people who grow up in like public school and go to parties, most of us out here have actually started using and abusing substances from a young age. Maybe not abusing for a lot of people, but anyway, so yeah. And I started smoking weed. I started started doing ecstasy, and it was like, to me back then, I was just a little kid. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Um, Before I knew it, I was smoking every day. Like, I was the biggest pothead in Hillcrest High. Everyone who knew me back then, before I got expelled, will tell you Jed Kossi is that man is baked 24/7. And it was no lie, like, they used to call me Red Eye Jedi because I'd have red eyes every time I came to class, but that was because I was doing water polo training in the morning and the chlorine would like mess with my eyes. But anyways, yeah, a bit of a tangent there. But so yeah, long story short, I eventually, it down spiraled so quickly, man. If you knew me from back in those days, I apologize sincerely, but I'm a changed man. But for real, like, I was completely off the rails. You know, I burned a lot of bridges. I made a fool of myself many times. Got into fights, got blackout drunk. You used to, by the age of 16, so now 14, started smoking weed, started drinking alcohol, started smoking cigarettes, and like started taking ecstasy and stuff like this. And I would always just like seek out these things. It was like I didn't have anything in my mind planned for the weekend except for, let's see how good we can feel. Like, what we can do to instigate like a really good feeling. And then when I was about 15, I had my first sexual encounter, and from there it was like, things just kind of went downhill, man. Like, I was doing all the wrong shit, and like I said, this is nothing special. This is something that most of us who live normal lives have probably experienced in their youth. And it only took a matter of 4 years for me to start doing crazy shit. So, I was the kind of person who you would go out with, and I would like run off in the middle of the night, make a whole new group of friends, come back with them, and then I would like disappear off somewhere, and I would just wake up in the morning in some stranger's room, was in someone's living room, completely hungover, feeling like shit, just looking for maybe a cigarette or something just to keep my fucking hands busy. And it was such a crap way to live, It would be this extreme buzz for like the whole night, and then sure enough, you're going to face the music the next day, and then for the next week, you're operating at like 40% because of the things you decided to do on the weekend, By the age of, I would say, 16, I started doing coke, and it didn't really become a regular thing back then very quickly because I didn't have a job and I didn't have money, so it's not like I could just go get whatever bags I wanted. But I stayed in a friend's house, who stayed up the road from me for like a month, and all day, every day, it was just, this house was like a party house / it was a fucking shithole. But yeah, so basically everyone who lived in this house would just do drugs all day, every day. 6 in the morning, you'd find them racking lines in the kitchen, always on the phone with a drug dealer. His name was Doggy, shady character, Nigerian no. And yeah, and basically like, so quickly the degree to which I was willing to cross that line of sin was so great, dude. Like, it got to the point where I would just like crave something to put up my nose. I wasn't even concerned about what it was. It's just like that feeling of putting something up your nose, like the way a cigarette addict just craves something to do with their fingers. It's like so nefarious, man, And I was just a kid. I had some trauma, of course. I had a lot of fucked up shit that happened in my childhood. I was just looking to enjoy myself, And very quickly it turned into this thing of like, now I've reached this high, but I'm not going to go back to baseline. I'm going to crash all the way down here. And now I'm sitting down here. And either I've got to stick out that misery until I come back to baseline, or I've got to do something else to bring me back up. And for each high, there is a even greater crash. And this is what no one tells you. And this is what I want any young kid out there who was like me, 14, 15, wants to get into the party scene, wants to get into drugs, and wants to try all these things out for themselves. All I'm going to say, I can't change any minds. Maybe I can. If I can, that would be great. But if I can just say one thing, is that for every high that you reach, you're going to crash way harder. and it's going to be way harder for you to pull yourself out of that little crash. That is a true story, my man. I speak from years and years, a decade of experience. I'm 25 now. I've been doing this shit, okay, not a decade, because I stopped doing all of this stuff I wasn't, anyways, blah, blah, blah. I would say like 7 years. 7 years I was taking in this nefarious crap. And by the age of 18, I was doing meth, because like in the little town I lived in, excuse my language. In the little town I lived in, meth was just a big thing, I guess. And yeah, like I said, it only took 4 years, and I was already on the hard shit, heavy shit. And the thing is with meth is that the high is so crazy euphoric that when you crash, it's like you don't come down here, you don't come below baseline, you go all the way down to the pits of hell, my friend, and you stay there for like a week. So I go out trolling, whatever. Some of my mates probably didn't know I was using meth, and I was very lucky because something happened in my life that broke my heart at the time, but it was a blessing in disguise, because if I had carried on going down that path, I'd be probably in a very different living situation right now, My dad is a meth addict, and he put our family through hell my whole childhood, he wasn't really in the picture most of the time, but he put my mom through hell, and I got a good taste of what that lifestyle brings. And here I was, 18 years old, dabbling in the same demonic crap, just looking for a good time, I'm not a bad person. I don't see myself as a bad person. I look out for people. I do good unto others. But here I was, sitting at Satan's dinner table, eating, and I didn't even know it. And back then I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in any of this stuff. I was pure, I wouldn't say atheist, I was spiritual. But that's the thing, is that spirituality, you're neither here nor there. You're actually unknowingly partaking in some nefarious stuff that you might not even know what you're doing, So yeah, I was doing like Kundalini yoga and stuff like that, trying to get myself to like transcend and all this and that. And it only ever led to more confusion, It only ever led to more anxiety and more of a hole to fill inside of me. I felt like that hole just kept getting bigger and bigger the more I got into all this spiritual mystic stuff, And yeah, so by the age of 18, my mom kicked me out of home, and I remember the day distinctly. She threw my bags over the gates because I wasn't allowed back inside, and she said to me, Jed, with tears streaming down her face, and I was crying too, she said, Jed, I love you, but you broke my heart, and I can never forgive you for that. And that very day, I walked to my friend Junior's house, and Junior was also, we were both in the same sort of situation with substances and this and that. Hope he's doing well. And yeah, so basically what happened was me and Junior and his cousin, one of his friends, Dylan, we walked on the train tracks all the way to Bothersville, to his cousin's place or something, like his uncle's place. And I remember smoking my last spliff and explaining to them on that walk what had just happened, how my mom had kicked me out and I had nowhere to go, and I was probably going to go walk to this halfway house now to seek shelter. And that's what I did. I smoked my last spliff, and certainly that was not the last time I smoked weed, but it was the beginning of my journey to sobriety, And yeah, I ended up walking another like 10 k's to this halfway house care line owned by a lady named Joey. And if you're from Hillcrest, you definitely know Joey. She's a very amazing woman, a godly woman who protects people. She's the reason I didn't have to sleep on the street many times, and she did it out of the goodness of her own heart. Yeah, I need to see her when I get back to Durban. So yeah, I ended up living at this place for 4 months. It was supposed to be 3 months, but I ended up staying for 4. And I was in there with the most amazing people, don't get me wrong, but some people with some fucked up backgrounds, like ex-gang members, 26s, numbers, whatever. People who were in prison for life sentences and now were in their halfway house, era. I don't know how it works. I was in there with a guy who shot his wife in the face with a shotgun because she walked in on him cheating. He walked in on her cheating. I was in there with Quakes, a guy who was a reformed gangster. He was a gang member in a Westfield prison for 21 years. 21 years is the life sentence in South Africa, by the way. So yeah, someone who had killed probably countless people. I was in there with murderers, ex-gang members, and yada yada yada. And I saw some pretty, I saw people having heroin withdrawals, meth withdrawals. I saw people having fits. I saw people getting shipped off to the ER. And when I was 15, I got expelled from Hawkrest High, and they sent me to the same place. So this was actually my second time there. The first time I was there was because the behavioral specialist at Hawkrest High had convinced my mom it would be a good idea to send me to rehab to get me to stop smoking weed, which definitely didn't work. If anything, I actually learned more in that place about substance abuse than anything. But here I was back 3 years later. I had my 18th birthday in Caroline, and I think, anyways. So yeah, and long story short, I kind of started putting the puzzle back, the puzzle pieces together of how like this wasn't leading to any sense of fulfillment. When I left Caroline, I started working for my mom's company, and I was working, I was making money and stuff like that. I was getting into the working world, so I was just a painter. I was just making like $200 a day or whatever. But honestly, I would just drink all of it and put all of it up my nose. And like when I started earning more, the same thing would happen. And here I was again. I'd come back from it, and here I was again jumping into the deep end because I just couldn't seem to quell that thirst for good times, And let me tell you, the next like 3 years of my life was absolute hell. I was a nervous wreck. I had so much anxiety up to here. Depression. I was a proper mess of a human being. And I wasn't even a fully grown adult yet. I was a complete mess. And it's not like I was living on the streets, like putting needles in my arms and stuff like that. Not to say that people who have lived that life and come back from it, like all respect, things happen in life that we sometimes feel we have no control over, and I get it, drugs lead you down a dark path, and before you know it, it only took me 4 years to get on meth, it just goes to show. And yeah, so where I was going with that is that I kept hitting my head on the same fucking thing, cocaine. I just kept going back to that thing. I just couldn't quell that thirst. It was like, even in the times where I thought I'd quit, I thought I'd like make it. It just took one person, one bad egg messaging me and saying, "Oh, what you doing tonight? You want to get together," or yada yada. And we always knew what would happen. We would get up, we'd meet up, and like half the friends I had back then were just like, we had nothing in common except for the fact that we like to abuse cocaine, and it led to such torment in my life. I just can't explain it. It was like I was in the pits of hell, and I felt like it was going to take such a long time for me to crawl out of this pit because I'd done my head in so badly with substances. I mean, at one point I actually thought my head was going to explode. I was like a couple bags deep with a friend of mine, not going to name any names, and I was at his house, and I had to go sit in his bathroom for like 4 hours and gather myself because I put so much coke up my nose, I actually thought my head was going to explode, and that's what it felt like. I felt like I was going to die, and by God's grace, nothing happened to me, and I'm here today. But there were many times like that, there were times when I was like 15, 16, I would leave on the weekend on a Friday or Thursday, and I wouldn't come back till Sunday. My mom would be calling the hospitals in the area to find out if anyone had been admitted because she couldn't get a hold of me, and I had no respect for my family. I just did my own thing, and whatever they thought happened to me, I didn't even think about it. It didn't even cross my mind, I was so selfish. And something happened to me in 2021. I can't put my finger on it, but something changed inside of me. I got back from a music festival, New Year's. I got fired on the same at the same festival, like first day of the year, I lost my job. And I got back from this music festival. And granted, I've been back to music festivals once or twice since then, but it's like when I go back now, it's not the same because I see everything in such a different light, you know? And yeah, what happened to me was I got back from this festival, and if you know festivals, you know how I am at festivals. It took me like 3 or 4 days to recover from this festival, or like any festival. That's just how it. Because festival is just an excuse to go out and get fucked up and do drugs. Let's be honest, because most of you wouldn't be going to festivals if there were no drugs. I know 1 or 2 people who go to festivals sober, you know. And I love festivals, but I just can't do it right now because of where I am at in my life, and there's just too many temptations, you know. And I just wish we could have festivals that didn't have to involve heavy drug abuse, you know, especially ketamine. That stuff is killing the sassy, you know. And yeah, something happened to me. I got back from this festival, and I felt like something was happening in my mind, you know. I had gotten so deep into this pit of despair almost that I snapped, and I was like, I'm never ever gonna put myself in these shoes again, you know. I don't ever want to feel that feeling again. And I got sober, and I stopped smoking cigarettes, stopped smoking weed, stopped drinking alcohol. You know, I got a job like a couple of weeks later as a bartender. God granted, I hated that job, you know, but I had a job and I was sober. I was a bartender who didn't drink, you know, and for 6-7 months I had it together, man, you know. And slowly but surely, because I was working in hospitality, you know, I started with weed. I started smoking weed again, and I slowly, like, you know, that wasn't the end of it for me. I carried on going back to Satan's table and sitting there eating with him, you know, not knowing. Well, now I had the knowledge that this was not going to lead to any sense of fulfillment, but I just kept going back. And my life has greatly transformed in the past 4 years, and it's not because I got it all together and I stayed sober and whatever. It's because I've been gradually putting in work over these years, and I've been consistently consistently showing up for myself. But I could be so much further if I just put the phone down and decided to be done with that shit, you know. I'm 25 years old, still haven't got my driver's license, you know. Granted, I've had great career success, but even that, it's like, I still could be doing so much better. I just know that if I'd put the phone down with substances, when I said I was going to do it, I would be streaks ahead of where I am now. And my message to you today, my friend, is that if you're out there and you're thinking of doing substances, and you're thinking of delving into that world because you're curious of what it's like, it's not worth it, man. I know it sounds so cheesy, but you are going to regret every single time you go back to that, you know. You're going to regret having even partaken in it in the first place. You're going to lose years of your life before you know it, my friend, and you're going to wonder, where did the time go, and what have I done? What have I done with this time, you know? Granted, some people have careers and still abuse drugs, but it doesn't matter. They could be so much better if they didn't do that. Look at John Jones. If John Jones wasn't out bagged up every weekend, he's still, you know, he's one of the greats, arguably the greatest, but imagine that man if he was stone cold sober, living in faith, you know. He would just be streaks ahead of everyone. No one would even be able to compare themselves to him, you know. And that's my message to you today, my friends. It's not worth it. Your curiosity is going to end up killing you, you know. And by the grace of God, I came right and I managed to get my shit together, and now the only thing I need to quit is cigarettes, you know. But yeah, thanks for listening to my story, and God bless.